I stood in my sister's pristine backyard, wine dripping down my navy dress like blood, while 24 guests pretended not to stare. My hands were still shaking from handing my mother the quilt I'd spent 3 weeks making, every stitch a prayer, every patch a memory. It was all I could afford, all I had to give. That's it? A blanket? Diane had laughed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Claire, you're embarrassing us. This is Mama's 90th birthday. Rebecca had circled closer, smiling that cold smile I'd known my whole life. You couldn't even try? Buy something nice? I'd looked at Mama then, sitting in her wicker chair with my quilt in her lap, her fingers tracing the embroidered hymn I'd stitched across the center. Be thou my vision, her favorite. I'd used fabric from her old dresses, pieces of our shared history, and sewn it all together with hands that were cracked from double shifts at the hospital. But she'd said nothing, just stared down at the quilt in silence while my sisters closed in. You've always been the family embarrassment, Diane had said, walking to the bar. She'd poured herself a glass of Merlot, then turned back to me with that practiced, perfect smile. But this is a new low. And then she'd tilted the glass, slowly, deliberately, letting the wine pour down the front of my dress while everyone watched. I'd waited for Mama to say something, anything. She never did. So I left. Drove home in my 15-year-old Honda, smelling like shame and cheap wine, crying so hard I had to pull over twice. I'd spent 56 years trying to be enough for them. Enough for Diane with her doctor husband and country club memberships. Enough for Rebecca with her PR firm and designer clothes. Enough for Mama, who always seemed to look right through me. I was never enough. That night, I sat on my rented duplex's sagging porch and asked God why love always felt like losing. Why giving everything still left me with nothing. I didn't expect an answer. But the next morning, my phone rang. Mama's attorney. He needed me at his office by 2 o'clock. Urgent matter. Estate business. My sisters would be there too. I almost didn't go. Almost called in, pulled the covers over my head, let them have whatever they wanted. But something, stubbornness maybe, or just the muscle memory of always showing up even when it hurt, made me get dressed and drive to that office on Abercorn Street. Diane's Mercedes was already in the parking lot, Rebecca's Lexus gleaming beside it. I walked into that mahogany-paneled office with wine stains still on my shoes, and I sat down in the leather chair next to my sisters who wouldn't look at me. The attorney opened a folder, cleared his throat. Your mother asked me to read her will now rather than waiting. She wanted you all to know. Diane leaned forward, hands clasped like she was in a business meeting. Everything goes to Claire. The words didn't make sense at first. They hung in the air like something impossible, something that happened to other people in other stories. The house, the savings, the antiques, the land, all of it. Diane's face went white. Rebecca grabbed the will with shaking hands. And then the attorney pulled out a letter. Mama's handwriting, neat and careful, the way she'd taught us to write when we were small. He read it aloud. Claire is the only one who loved me, not my money. She's the only one who called just to talk, who visited when she didn't have to, who sat with me in the hospital when I had pneumonia and you two were too busy. She's the only one who made me something with her own hands because that's all she could give. The quilt she made me will be the last thing I hold when I die. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just sat there while my sisters' carefully constructed worlds shattered around them. Diane, Rebecca, I love you, but you've never needed me the way Claire has. You've never needed anything from me except my approval. Claire needed more, and she gave more. That's why she's getting everything. The silence in that room was deafening. And then Diane stood up, her voice shaking with rage and fear. This isn't fair. We can contest this. She's not in her right mind. But I was already standing, already walking toward the door. Claire, please, Rebecca called after me, tears streaming down her perfect face. We're sorry. We didn't mean... Please, you have to understand. I stopped, turned back, looked at them both. I spent my whole life trying to understand you, I said quietly. Trying to be like you. Trying to earn what you got for free. And you know what? I'm done. I walked out of that office into the Savannah afternoon, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. But that was just the beginning. Because what happened next? The phone calls, the begging, the desperate attempts to claw back what they'd lost. That's when I learned what inheritance really means, and what it costs to finally be enough. Not for them, for me. I woke up at 4:47 a.m., on the morning of Mama's 90th birthday party, 3 minutes before my alarm was set to go off. That's what happens when you work night shifts for 30 years. Your body learns to wake itself, whether you want it to or not. The room was still dark. Outside my window, the cicadas were just starting their morning hum, that thick Georgia sound that means summer's not done with you yet, even in late September. I lay there for a moment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of Florida, and I thought about the quilt folded in the box under my bed. I'd wrapped it the night before, careful and slow, using brown paper from the grocery store and kitchen twine I'd found in the junk drawer. It wasn't fancy, but it was all I had. I got up, made coffee in the percolator that had been sputtering for the last 6 months, and sat at my small kitchen table. The duplex I rented was on the east side of Savannah, near the hospital, in a neighborhood where the houses leaned a little and the porches sagged under the weight of decades. My landlord kept promising to fix the front steps. I'd stopped asking. The coffee was bitter. I drank it anyway. I thought about calling in sick, just staying home, avoiding the whole thing. But Mama had asked me to come, and even after all these years, even after all the times I'd felt invisible in my own family, I couldn't say no to her. Maybe that made me weak. Maybe it made me faithful. I wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. By the time I showered and dressed, the sun was starting to break through the live oaks outside. I put on the only dress I owned that still looked halfway decent, a navy blue shirt dress I'd bought at a thrift store on Abercorn Street 2 years ago. It had a small tear near the hem that I'd stitched closed with blue thread that didn't quite match. I hoped no one would notice. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, 56 years old, gray streaks in my brown hair that I'd stopped dyeing because the box color cost $12 and I needed that for groceries. Lines around my eyes from squinting under fluorescent hospital lights, hands that were dry and cracked no matter how much lotion I used. I looked tired. I was tired. But I smiled at my reflection anyway, the way I'd learned to do at work when a patient's family asked me if their loved one was going to make it. And I knew the answer was no, but couldn't say it out loud. "You're going to be fine, Claire," I whispered. "It's just a party." I didn't believe myself. I stopped at Kroger on the way to pick up a card. The selection was slim, mostly generic birthday wishes with pastel flowers and gold script. I found one that said, "To a mother who means the world," and bought it for $3.49. Inside, I wrote, "Mama, I made this with my hands and my heart. I hope you feel the love in every stitch. Happy 90th. I love you. Claire." I sat in the parking lot for a while after that, holding the card, wondering if my sisters had written anything in theirs, or if they'd just signed their names in expensive ink and moved on. Probably the latter. Diane and Rebecca didn't waste time on sentimentality. They were efficient, polished, successful. I was none of those things. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward Diane's house in the historic district, the part of Savannah where the streets were brick and the houses had columns and the tourists took pictures from the sidewalk. I didn't belong there, but I was going anyway. Diane's house was a restored Georgian colonial, painted pale yellow with white trim and black shutters. There was a fountain in the front yard shaped like a cherub, and the lawn was so green it looked fake. I parked my Aero 9 Honda Civic behind a row of Mercedes and BMWs and felt my stomach tighten. I grabbed the box with the quilt and the card and walked up the brick path to the front door. I could hear music inside, something classical, strings and piano, and the murmur of voices. I rang the doorbell. Rebecca answered. She was wearing a cream-colored linen dress that probably cost more than my car payment, and her hair was blown out in perfect waves. She looked me up and down, her smile thin. "Claire," she said, "you made it." I said I would. Well, come in, everyone's out back." She stepped aside and I walked into the foyer. The floors were marble. There was a chandelier overhead that looked like it belonged in a museum. Everything smelled like lilies and expensive candles. I followed Rebecca through the house, past the formal living room with its white furniture and framed art, past the dining room where a long table was set with china and crystal, and out onto the back patio. And that's when I saw it. The party. There were at least 24 people scattered across the lawn, neighbors, Mama's bridge club friends, a few cousins I hadn't seen in years. There were white linen-covered tables with floral centerpieces, a bar set up with a bartender in a bow tie, and a string quartet playing under the shade of a magnolia tree. Catering staff circulated with trays of shrimp and grits, deviled eggs, and little cucumber sandwiches cut into triangles. It was beautiful. It was also completely out of my league. I spotted Mama sitting in a wicker chair near the center of the lawn, surrounded by guests. She was wearing a lavender dress and a pearl necklace, her white hair pinned up in soft curls. She looked small, fragile, but her eyes were still sharp. Diane was standing next to her, one hand on Mama's shoulder, smiling at someone telling a story. She looked like she was hosting a campaign fundraiser, not a birthday party. I walked over, clutching the box. "Mama?" I said softly. She turned and looked at me. For a moment, her expression softened. "Claire, you came?" "Of course I came." Diane glanced at the box in my hands, then back at me. "You can put that on the gift table," she said, nodding toward a table near the house. "We're opening everything later." "Okay." I walked over and set the box down next to a pile of gift bags and wrapped boxes, shiny paper, silk ribbons, bows the size of my fist. My brown paper package looked like it had wandered in from another decade. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, and I felt something twist in my chest. Not quite shame. Not quite anger. Just a deep, familiar ache that I'd carried for so long it felt like part of my bones. The party went on. I stayed on the edges, sipping sweet tea and nodding politely when someone asked me how I was doing. I told them I was fine. I told them work was good. I told them all the small lies people tell at parties because the truth is too heavy to carry in polite company. At one point, I found myself standing near the magnolia tree, watching the string quartet. The violinist was young, maybe mid-20s, and she played with her eyes closed, her fingers moving like she was speaking a language only she understood. I wondered what it felt like to be that sure of yourself, that free. "Claire?" I turned. Rebecca was standing next to me, holding a glass of white wine. "You look tired," she said. "I worked last night." "Still at the hospital?" "Yeah." She nodded, sipping her wine. "You ever think about doing something else? Something less exhausting?" I looked at her. "Like what?" She shrugged. "I don't know, something with better hours. Better pay. I like what I do. Do you?" She tilted her head, studying me. "Or do you just not know how to do anything else?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure. She smiled and walked away, leaving me standing there with the taste of shame in my mouth. When it was time to cut the cake, everyone gathered around. The cake was 3 tiers, covered in white fondant and sugar flowers, with Happy 90th Dorothy written in gold script across the top. Diane handed Mama the knife, and everyone sang. Mama smiled and waved and blew out the candles, and for a moment, she looked genuinely happy. Then Diane clapped her hands. "All right, everyone, let's do presents." The crowd shifted, forming a loose circle around Mama's chair. Diane brought over the gifts one by one, setting them in Mama's lap. Rebecca went first. She handed Mama a large shopping bag with tissue paper spilling out the top. "This is from me," Rebecca said, beaming. Mama pulled out a handbag, Italian leather, cream-colored, with gold hardware and a monogram embossed on the front. It was gorgeous, the kind of thing you see in magazines. "Oh, Rebecca," Mama said, running her fingers over the leather. "This is beautiful. I had it custom made. Took 3 months." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Someone said, "How thoughtful." Someone else said, "Stunning." Diane went next. She handed Mama a cream envelope. "This is a spa package," Diane said. 2 nights at the Inlet Resort on Tybee Island. Massages, facials, the works. You deserve it, Mama." Mama opened the envelope and read the voucher. She looked up at Diane, eyes shining. "Oh, honey, this is too much." "Nothing's too much for you." More murmurs, more smiles. I stood there, gripping my tea glass, watching. And then Diane turned to me. "Claire, you're up." I walked over to the gift table and picked up my box. It felt heavier than it had before. I carried it over to Mama and set it in her lap. "This is from me," I said quietly. She looked at the brown paper, the twine, the simplicity of it. Then she started to unwrap it, slowly, carefully. The quilt unfolded in her hands. Soft blues and florals and creams, patches of fabric from old dresses, from pillowcases, from a life lived quietly. And across the center, in careful, uneven stitching, "Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart." Mama stared at it. The crowd went silent. And then Diane laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a short, sharp sound, like a door slamming shut. "That's it?" she said. "A blanket?" I felt my face go hot. "It's a quilt. I made it." "We can see that," Rebecca said, stepping closer. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Claire, this is Mama's 90th birthday. You couldn't have. I don't know, bought something nice? I couldn't afford. Exactly. Diane crossed her arms. You couldn't afford it. So instead, you brought this craft project. Like we're at a church bazaar. Someone in the crowd coughed. Another person looked away. I looked at Mama. She was still holding the quilt, her fingers tracing the stitches, but she wasn't saying anything. Say something, Mama, I whispered. She didn't. Diane walked over to the bar and poured herself a glass of Merlot. She took a sip, then turned back to me. You know what, Claire? You've always been the family embarrassment. But this? She gestured at the quilt. This is a new low. And then she walked toward me. I didn't move. She stopped right in front of me, her smile cold and sharp. And then she tilted the glass and poured the wine down the front of my dress. The crowd gasped. The red spread across the navy blue like blood. I stood there, shaking, soaked, unable to breathe. I looked at Mama one more time, waiting. She looked down at the quilt. Silent. I grabbed my purse and left. I made it to my car before the tears came. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. The wine had soaked through my dress, cold and sticky against my skin, and the smell of it, sharp and sour, made my stomach turn. I sat there in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe, trying not to fall apart completely. Because if I started crying now, really crying, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop. Through the windshield, I could see the party still going on. The string quartet was playing again. People were laughing, drinking, moving on. Like nothing had happened. Like I'd never been there at all. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, my tires crunching over the brick street. I didn't look back. The drive home was a blur. I remember stopping at a red light on Bull Street and watching a family cross in front of me. Mom, Dad, 2 kids holding ice cream cones, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. I remember thinking how small my life had become, how invisible. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the peeling paint of my duplex. I sat there for a moment, staring at the house. My neighbor's dog was barking. Somewhere down the street, someone was grilling, and the smell of charcoal and lighter fluid drifted through the open window. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and walked straight to the bathroom. I peeled off the ruined dress and stood there in my underwear, staring at myself in the mirror. The wine had stained my skin a faint pink. My mascara had run. I looked like someone who'd been in a fight and lost. I turned on the shower, as hot as I could stand it, and stepped in. The water scalded my shoulders, but I didn't care. I just stood there, letting it wash over me, and I cried. Deep, ugly sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know I still had access to. And then, because I didn't know what else to do, I prayed. Not out loud. Just in my head, the way I used to when I was a little girl and something scared me. God, I don't understand. I tried. I really tried. Why wasn't it enough? Why am I never enough? I didn't get an answer. I never did. But something about saying the words, even silently, made the weight in my chest a little lighter. I stayed in the shower until the water ran cold, then wrapped myself in a towel and sat on the edge of my bed. The box the quilt had been in was still under the bed, empty now. I pulled it out and stared at it. 3 weeks of work. 3 weeks of cutting and stitching and praying that it would mean something. And it had meant nothing. I thought about calling someone. A friend. A coworker. But I didn't have many of those. Most of my friendships had withered over the years. Casualties of long shifts and exhaustion, and the quiet shame of not being able to afford to go out for drinks or dinner. I had work acquaintances. I had patients' families who thanked me and then forgot my name, but I didn't have anyone I could call at 8 p.m. on a Saturday and say, I need you. So I just sat there, alone. Eventually, I got dressed in my pajamas, an old t-shirt from a 5K I'd run a decade ago and a pair of cotton shorts with a broken elastic, and went to the kitchen. I wasn't hungry, but I made myself eat anyway. A can of tomato soup, 2 saltines, a glass of water. I sat at the table and stared at the wall, and I thought about my sisters. Diane had always been the golden child. Smart, ambitious, married well. She'd graduated summa cum laude from UGA, went to law school, then quit to marry Dr. Size, Richard Pemberton, and raise their 2 perfect children in their perfect house. She threw charity galas. She chaired the junior league. She was everything Mama had wanted her daughters to be. Rebecca was the creative one, the entrepreneur. She'd started her PR firm from nothing and turned it into something that mattered. She had clients all over the Southeast. She wore designer clothes and flew to New York for Fashion Week and talked about personal branding like it was a religion. And then there was me, the nurse. The one who worked nights and weekends and holidays because someone had to. The one who couldn't afford vacations or manicures or Italian leather handbags. The one who made quilts out of old fabric because that's all she could give. I'd spent my whole life trying to prove I was worth something, trying to earn their respect, their love. And tonight I'd learned the truth. I never would. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The look on Diane's face, the wine pouring down, the silence from Mama. That silence was the worst part, because it meant she agreed, or at least she didn't disagree enough to stop it. I thought about not going to work the next day, just calling in, pulling the covers over my head, and disappearing for a while. But I couldn't afford to miss a shift. And honestly, I didn't know what else to do with myself. Work was the only place I felt useful, the only place I felt like I mattered. So at 5 a.m., I got up, made coffee, and got dressed in my scrubs. I looked at myself in the mirror and practiced smiling. It didn't look convincing, but it would have to do. I was halfway through my shift when my phone rang. I was in the break room, eating a granola bar and charting notes, and I almost didn't answer. But the caller ID said Hollis and Associates, and I recognized the name. That was Mama's attorney. My stomach dropped. I answered. Hello? Miss Donahue? This is Bernard Hollis. I'm your mother's attorney. Is she okay? She's fine, but I need you to come to my office this afternoon. There's a matter we need to discuss. It's urgent. What kind of matter? I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you be here at 2 o'clock? I looked at the clock. It was 10:30. I guess so. But can you tell me what this is about? It concerns your mother's estate. I'll explain everything when you arrive. Your sisters will be there as well. My sisters. I closed my eyes. Okay, I'll be there. Thank you, Miss Donahue. He hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, my heart pounding. Estate. That meant the will. That meant Mama was planning something. Or maybe she was sick. Maybe something had happened after I left the party and no one had bothered to tell me. I finished my shift in a daze, barely able to focus. I kept checking my phone, waiting for another call, another message, something that would explain what was happening. But nothing came. At 1:45, I pulled into the parking lot of Hollis & Associates, a small law office on Abercorn Street in a converted historic house with white columns and a black front door. Diane's Mercedes was already there. So was Rebecca's Lexus. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and went inside. The receptionist smiled at me, a young woman with red lipstick and a lace collar, and told me to go straight back to Mr. Hollis's office. I walked down a narrow hallway lined with framed diplomas and old photographs of Savannah, and I found the door at the end. I knocked. Come in, a voice said. I opened the door. Diane and Rebecca were already seated in 2 leather chairs facing a large mahogany desk. They both turned to look at me. Diane's expression was unreadable. Rebecca looked annoyed. Claire, Diane said, you're here. Yeah. Mr. Hollis stood up from behind the desk. He was in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it had been tailored. He extended his hand, and I shook it. Miss Donahue, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. There was a 3rd chair next to my sister's. I sat down, my heart hammering in my chest. Mr. Hollis opened a folder on his desk and adjusted his glasses. I'll get straight to the point. Your mother asked me to schedule this meeting. She wants you all to be aware of the contents of her will now, rather than waiting until after her passing. Diane leaned forward. Is she sick? Is something wrong? She's in good health as far as I know, but she's 90 years old and she wants to be clear about her intentions. Rebecca crossed her arms. Okay, so what are her intentions? Mr. Hollis looked at me, then at Diane, then at Rebecca, and then he said very calmly, everything goes to Claire. The room went silent. I blinked. What? The house. The savings, the antiques, the land in Beaufort, all of it. It's all left to you, Miss Donahue. Diane's face went white. That's not possible. It's very possible. Your mother redrafted her will 3 months ago. I have it here. He slid a document across the desk. Rebecca grabbed it, scanning the pages. Her hands were shaking. This doesn't make sense. Why would she included a letter. Mr. Hollis pulled out a sealed envelope. She asked me to read it to you. He opened it carefully and unfolded a single piece of paper, Mama's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. Neat, precise, with little loops on the capital letters. Mr. Hollis cleared his throat and began to read. To my daughters, I'm sure this will come as a surprise to some of you. But I've thought about this decision for a long time, and I'm at peace with it. Claire is the only one who loved me, not my money. She's the only one who called me just to talk, who visited me when she didn't have to, who sat with me in the hospital when I had pneumonia last winter and you two were too busy. She's the only one who made me something with her own hands because that's all she could give. The quilt she made me will be the last thing I hold when I die. I've already told the hospice nurse to make sure of it. Diane, Rebecca, I love you. But you've never needed me the way Claire has. You've never needed anything from me except my approval, and I gave you that freely. Claire needed more, and she gave more. That's why she's getting everything. I hope you'll understand. But if you don't, that's all right too. This is my choice, and I'm making it with a clear mind and a full heart. Love, Mama. Mr. Hollis set the letter down. No one spoke. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just sat there staring at the letter, my eyes burning with tears I couldn't let fall. Not here, not in front of them. Diane stood up. Her face was red. This is insane. She's not in her right mind. We can contest this. You can try, Mr. Hollis said calmly. But I assure you, your mother was of sound mind when she made these changes. I have documentation to support that. Rebecca turned to me. Her eyes were wet. Claire, please, you don't need all of this. You don't. I stood up, my voice shaking. Don't you dare. We're your sisters. You humiliated me. You poured wine on me in front of everyone. You called me an embarrassment. I looked at Diane, and Mama didn't say a word. She just sat there and let it happen. She was in shock. She was silent. And now you want me to feel sorry for you. Diane's jaw tightened. This isn't fair. No, I said quietly. It isn't. But it's what she wanted. I turned to Mr. Hollis. Is there anything else you need from me? Not today. I'll be in touch about the details. Thank you. I walked out of the office, down the hallway, out the front door, and I didn't look back. I sat in my car for a long time, my hands on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Mama had given me everything, not because I deserved it, not because I was better, but because I'd loved her, because I'd shown up, because I'd stitched my heart into a quilt and handed it to her, even knowing it might not be enough. And it had been. It had been enough. I started to cry, not sad tears, not angry tears, just release. Years of carrying the weight of not being enough, of being the sister who didn't measure up, of believing the lies they'd told me about myself. It all came spilling out in the front seat of my 15-year-old Honda, parked on a quiet street in Savannah. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. My phone started buzzing, text after text. Diane, Rebecca, both of them. I didn't read them. I just turned off my phone and drove home. When I got there, I sat on my front porch with a glass of sweet tea and watched the sunset. The air smelled like jasmine and cut grass. The neighbor's dog had stopped barking. Somewhere down the street, kids were laughing. I thought about Mama, about the quilt, about the letter, and I thought about forgiveness. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? Not just an inheritance, but a kind of absolution. A way of saying, you were enough. You always were. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive my sisters. Maybe that wasn't my job. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something you gave because someone deserved it, but because you couldn't carry the weight of holding on to it anymore. I wasn't there yet. But maybe, someday, I would be. For now, I just sat on my porch and let the evening wash over me, and I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks to a God I wasn't always sure was listening. But tonight I believed he was. The call started that night. I'd turned my phone back on around 9, mostly out of habit. I was on call for work, and I couldn't afford to miss an emergency page. The screen lit up immediately. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, all from Diane and Rebecca. I didn't read them, not at first. I just sat there on my couch staring at the notifications, feeling something cold settle in my stomach, because I knew what they wanted, and I knew I wasn't ready to give it to them. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the texts. Diane, Claire, we need to talk. Please call me. Diane, This is ridiculous. Mama wasn't thinking clearly. Diane, you can't seriously think you deserve all of this. Rebecca. Claire, please pick up Rebecca. We're family. We can work this out. Rebecca, I'm sorry about what happened at the party. I really am. But this isn't fair to any of us. Diane, if you don't respond, we're going to have to take legal action. Rebecca, don't let Diane bully you. Just call me, please. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. My hands were shaking. They were scared. I could feel it in every word, every desperate punctuation mark. They weren't sorry. They were just afraid of losing something they'd always assumed would be theirs. I turned the phone off again and went to bed. The next few days were strange, surreal. I went to work, came home, ate meals I didn't taste, and tried to pretend my life hadn't just been turned inside out. But it had, and I didn't know what to do with it. I kept thinking about Mama, about the letter, about the fact that she'd known, long before that party, long before the wine and the humiliation, that I was the only one who'd loved her for her, not for what she could give. Part of me wanted to call her, to thank her, to ask her why she'd waited so long to tell me, but I didn't, because I was afraid. Afraid that if I heard her voice, I'd break down. Afraid that I'd say something I couldn't take back. Afraid that she'd tell me she'd changed her mind. So I just kept going, one foot in front of the other, the way I always had. On the fourth day, Rebecca showed up at my house. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the knock. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing on the porch, wearing jeans and a white blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired, smaller, somehow, than she had at the party. I thought about not answering, but something in me, some old, stubborn instinct to be kind even when it hurt, made me open the door. Claire, she said. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. Rebecca, can I come in? I hesitated. Then I stepped aside. She walked into the living room, looking around like she'd never been there before. Which, to be fair, she hadn't. Not in years. She took in the sagging couch, the stack of library books on the coffee table, the cracked picture frame on the mantel that held a photo of Mama from 20 years ago. You want coffee? I asked. Sure. I poured 2 mugs and handed her one. We sat down at the kitchen table across from each other, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Rebecca said, I'm sorry. I looked at her. For what? For what happened at the party? For the way Diane treated you? For not standing up for you? You laughed. She flinched. I know. You stood there and watched her pour wine on me, and you laughed. I didn't know what else to do. You could have said something. You could have stopped her. I know. Her voice cracked, and I'm sorry. I stared into my car. Why are you here, Rebecca? She took a shaky breath. Because I don't want to lose you. You already did. No, not like this. Not over money. I looked up at her. This isn't about money. Then what is it about? Respect? Dignity? Being treated like I matter? Her eyes filled with tears. You do matter. Not to you, not to Diane, not even to Mama half the time. That's not true. Then why didn't she say anything? My voice was louder now, harder. Why did she just sit there and let it happen? Rebecca wiped her eyes. I don't know. Because she didn't think I was worth defending. Because she agreed with you. She left you everything, Claire. Out of guilt, not love. Rebecca shook her head. You didn't read the letter the way I did. I was there. She said you were the only one who loved her. Do you know what that felt like to hear? Do you know how that made me feel? I stood up. I don't care how it made you feel. She looked up at me, shocked. I spent my whole life caring about how you felt. How Diane felt. How Mama felt. I bent over backwards trying to make everyone happy, trying to be good enough, and it was never enough. I was never enough. And now you want me to comfort you? Claire. No. I walked to the door and opened it. You need to leave. She stood up, her face pale. Please, don't do this. I'm not doing anything. You did this. You and Diane. And now you have to live with it. She walked to the door, stopped, and looked at me one more time. I really am sorry. I know. Does that mean anything to you? I thought about it. Really thought about it. And then I said, not yet. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and walked out. I closed the door and locked it. And then I sat down on the floor and cried until I had nothing left. 2 weeks later, I went to see Mama. I'd been putting it off, making excuses. telling myself I was too busy, too tired, too afraid. But the truth was, I didn't know what to say to her. I didn't know how to reconcile the woman who'd written that letter with the woman who'd sat silent while I was humiliated. But I had to try, because she was still my mother. And because, despite everything, I still loved her. She lived in a small assisted living facility on the south side of Savannah, a clean, quiet place with wide hallways and nurses who smiled too much. I signed in at the front desk and walked to her room, my heart pounding with every step. I knocked. "Come in," she called. I opened the door. She was sitting in a rocking chair by the window, the quilt I'd made her draped across her lap. She looked up when she saw me, and her face softened. "Claire," she said. "You came?" "Yeah." I walked in and sat down on the edge of her bed. For a moment, we just looked at each other. "I've been calling you," she said. "I know." "You didn't answer." "I know." She nodded slowly. "You're angry with me." "Yes." "Because I didn't say anything. At the party." "Yes." She looked down at the quilt, running her fingers over the stitches. "I should have, I know that. But I was. I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of them. Of losing them." She looked up at me, her eyes wet. "I know that sounds foolish. But I've spent so much of my life trying to keep this family together, trying to make everyone happy. And I thought if I said something, if I took your side, they'd never forgive me. So you let them humiliate me instead." I did. "And I'm sorry, Claire. I'm so sorry." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Why did you leave me everything?" "Because you deserved it." "That's not an answer." She smiled faintly. "Yes, it is. You gave me more than they ever did. Not things. Not money. Just you. Your time. Your love. That quilt." She held it up. "Do you know I sleep with this every night?" I shook my head. "I do, because it reminds me that I'm loved. Really loved. Not for what I have, but for who I am. And that's worth more than anything else in this world." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was thin, papery, cool to the touch. "I failed you, Claire. I know I did. But I'm trying to make it right. That's all I can do now." I looked at her. Really looked at her. And I saw something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not of dying, not of being alone, but of being forgotten, of not mattering. And I realized that we weren't so different after all. "I forgive you," I said quietly, her eyes filled with tears. "You do?" "I'm trying to." She squeezed my hand. "That's all I can ask for." We sat there for a long time, holding hands, not saying anything. Outside the window, the afternoon sun was starting to fade, casting long shadows across the garden. Somewhere down the hall, a television was playing. Someone laughed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. I felt hope. Over the next few months, things started to shift. Slowly. Painfully. But they shifted. Diane stopped calling. I heard through a mutual cousin that she'd hired a lawyer to contest the will. But Mr. Hollis had been right. There was no legal ground to stand on. Mama had been of sound mind. The will was airtight. Diane eventually dropped it. But I never heard from her again. Not a call, not a text. Nothing. Rebecca kept trying. She'd send me messages every few weeks. "Thinking of you. Hope you're doing okay. I miss you." I didn't respond at first. But eventually, I did. Short replies. Nothing too deep. But it was something. One day she asked if we could meet for coffee. I said yes. We met at a small cafe on Broughton Street, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and art on the walls from local students. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. "I got you a latte," she said. "I remember you like them sweet." "Thanks." I sat down. We didn't say anything for a while, just sipped our coffee and watched people walk by outside. Finally, Rebecca said, "I've been going to therapy." I looked at her. "Yeah?" "Yeah. Trying to figure out why I treated you the way I did. Why I let Diane treat you that way." "What did you figure out?" She smiled sadly. "That I was jealous. Of me? Of how easy it was for you to just be yourself, to not care what people thought, to give without expecting anything back. I've spent my whole life performing, trying to be impressive, trying to matter, and you just were. And I hated you for it." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said quickly. "I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm sorry. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Regret. Real, honest regret. I'm not ready to forgive you yet, I said, but I'm trying. She nodded. That's all I can ask for. We finished our coffee. We talked about small things, work, the weather, a movie she'd seen. It wasn't deep. It wasn't healing, but it was a start. And sometimes a start is enough. Mama passed away 6 months later, peacefully, in her sleep, with the quilt wrapped around her shoulders. I was there when it happened. I'd started visiting her every Sunday after church, sitting with her, reading to her, just being present. And on that final Sunday, I held her hand while she took her last breath. The funeral was small, quiet, just me, Rebecca, a few cousins, and some friends from her bridge club. Diane didn't come. I didn't expect her to. We buried Mama in Bonaventure Cemetery, under a live oak draped with Spanish moss. The sun was setting, casting everything in gold, and as they lowered the casket into the ground, I thought about the quilt, about the stitches, about the love I'd sewn into every seam, and I thought about what Mama had said to me that day in her room. You gave me more than they ever did. Not things, not money, just you. I realized then that inheritance wasn't about houses or savings or antiques. It was about what you passed down that couldn't be measured. Love, faithfulness, the willingness to show up, even when it hurt. And I'd inherited that, not from a will, but from the life I'd lived, from the choices I'd made. After the funeral, Rebecca came up to me. She was crying, her mascara running. I'm sorry I wasn't a better sister, she said. I looked at her, and I made a choice. You still can be, I said. She looked at me surprised. Really? It's going to take time, and it's going to be hard, but yeah, if you want to try, I'm willing. She hugged me, and I let her. 6 months after that, I sold Mama's house. It was too big for me, too full of memories I wasn't ready to live with every day. I used the money to pay off my debts, fix my car, and put a down payment on a small house near the hospital. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a porch with a swing. I kept the quilt. It's folded at the end of my bed now, and sometimes when I can't sleep, I run my fingers over the stitches and think about Mama, about forgiveness, about love. Rebecca and I have coffee once a month. We're not close, not the way sisters should be, but we're trying, and that's something. Diane sent me a Christmas card last year. No note, just her signature. I didn't send one back, but I didn't throw it away either. I put it in a drawer, and sometimes I take it out and look at it and wonder if someday I'll be ready to reach out. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a journey, and some journeys take longer than others. I still work at Mercy General, still do the double shifts, still hold the hands of dying strangers, but it doesn't feel the same anymore, because I know now that I'm not just surviving, I'm living. I'm choosing every day to show up, to love, to give what I can, even when it's not enough, because sometimes it is enough. Sometimes it's more than enough. And on the days when I doubt that, when the weight of the world feels too heavy and I wonder if any of it matters, I look at the quilt and I remember. I remember the stitches, the hymn, the letter, and I remember that I was loved, that I am loved, and that's the only inheritance that really matters. And be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me, save that thou art. During my mom's 90th birthday party, my sisters called me the family embarrassment for bringing a simple gift and poured wine on my clothes. The next day, when they found out who would inherit her house, they started begging for forgiveness.